When you're burnt out, you feel like you're taking time away from the things that you should be doing.
Vulnerability is a superpower. This is our reality. This is what everyone else is going through.
There is this myth that you can have it all. You literally can't do everything.
Welcome to Beyond Bosch Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's episode is one I think we can all relate to. We are going to talk about work-life balance, burnout, and what that means, and how we can support ourselves and our organizations and our associates. As with all episodes, this is not intended as medical advice. If you have physical or mental challenges, please contact a healthcare professional. And today with us, we have two of our HR representatives from Bosch in the United States. First, we have Carolina de Arriba. She is an HR professional with over 15 years of progressive corporate and plant experience across different areas within HR and in 3 different countries. She's currently the VP of Associate and Organizational Development at Bosch. And joining her, we have Jason Paradowski, who is the Director of HR Shared Services team here at Bosch in North America. And he has been in that role since 2013. And now the regional head for HR Shared Services, providing support for over 42,000 associates across the Americas. So welcome, both of you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jessica. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. So I know I just did a very brief intro. It's never enough to who you really are as a person. I'd love for both of you to just share a little bit about yourselves and who you are and what you actually do beyond that title. And Carolina, would you go first?
Sure. So I've been with Bosch for almost 15 years now, which is hard to believe. I actually joined Bosch in Mexico. I am originally from Spain, so if you're trying to guess where my accent is coming from, is a match of all different places where I've been. But originally from Spain, joined Bosch in Mexico, always been in HR in many different roles. I'm really passionate about HR, but within HR, I'm really passionate about associate development and learning. That's something that translates also to my private life outside of work. I am a mom of 2. I think that will come very relevant, and you'll probably will come up on our conversation today when we talk about burnout and work-life balance. Wearing always a lot of different hats and playing a lot of different roles, which I think is our reality today. So once again, Jessica, thank you very much for having us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Jason, would you take a minute to share about yourself as well?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I too have been with Bosch for about 15 years and have about 25 years of professional experience in HR. Have known Carolina for the last 10 years or so at Bosch because she came into my role after I had the opportunity to work for Bosch overseas in Germany for a period of time. And then when came back, as you mentioned, yeah, I currently head up the Shared Services organization for us here across the Americas. So I'm responsible for things like payroll and benefits and international assignments across the region. Perhaps what's maybe a little bit different between the two of us. Yeah, I currently have a team of about 160 people across the region. And yeah, so while I got into HR for many of the same reasons that Carolina loves her job in terms of associate development, I've had the opportunity now to really, put my money where my mouth is, so to speak, and not just be a consultant as an HR partner, but have to be an operational leader and manager, handling, again, hundreds of thousands of transactions per year for our associates.
Well, that's a lot. I feel like with both of what you just shared, I think that sets you up to know a lot of different types of people. You've probably interacted with a lot of different variety of associates. The diversity we have, I know at Bosch, is great and brings a lot of challenges. And one of those being the topic we're here to talk about today, work-life balance, burnout, and how we, manage that, especially in these what we want to call post-COVID times, but are still currently right in the thick of it, it feels like. And I guess first, I would love to hear what even is work-life balance to you guys? What does that even mean? How do you personally feel about that? And how do you talk to associates about that?
So for me, I personally don't like the term work-life balance. I personally believe that doesn't exist, because when you talk about balance, right, it means that all pieces are equally distributed. And typically we think about balance from a time standpoint, right? That we're able to spend equal amount of time in different areas of our lives. And I think that is just not possible, right? If you think about how much hours we spend at work and how much hours we spend sleeping, we always would feel that there's not ever enough time to spend with our families or enjoying our hobbies or doing anything other than those things. I do believe in centeredness, in living a life that is centered. And for me, the way I define that, or the way I define work-life balance, if you will, is being very aware of what your priorities are in life in general and feeling fulfilled in all of those priorities. Mm-hmm. And knowing that those priorities can change over time. For me, actually, is a matter of a daily reprioritization, sometimes even multiple times during the day, depending on what life throws at you and what things come your way. But I think we a lot of times have this concept of work-life balance that, because we have an unrealistic definition of what that means, leaves us feeling frustrated that we can't ever achieve it. And I think for me, thinking about, one, having very clear what are my priorities, and two, making sure that I'm doing what is necessary for me to feel fulfilled in those areas, that gives me that sense of centeredness that for me is a better thing to pursue, more realistic and more fulfilling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Carolina just said. I, too, don't really believe in the term work-life balance. I believe in choice, right? And that you choose how you spend your time and how you don't spend your time, and that you can be satisfied with those choices that you've made and not feel overwhelmed by them if you're spending the time on the things that you do value the most and that you prioritize at a particular moment in time. You know, there is this myth, I think, that has been prevalent in our society for some time. That's this idea that you can have it all. And it gets worse and worse every year because of, the interconnectedness of our society, the amount of information coming at you. You literally can't do everything. You can do anything, but you can't do everything, right? And so focus and choice lead to, I think, a sense of satisfaction with the choices that you've made. So that way, then you do feel balanced as a human being. But I would concur. I don't think that you can balance all areas of your life. It's just not possible. It's all about choosing what to do and what not to do with the time that you have available.
I love that. I fully support everything you just said. I totally agree. I think also what you guys are both getting at is it's personal too, right? Each of our balance is very personal. What that means to us, what we feel, and when we feel overwhelmed is different from when someone else feels overwhelmed. And I think one of the main factors for that, Jason, you kind of alluded to this, of the information age we're in, of social media and this comparison and this constant, flood of you can do this and do that and all of these things and 8 hours in the day, sleep when you're dead, all these. Or be on this diet and take this supplement. And, it just can be very overwhelming. And, this will give you balance. But it really comes down to exactly what you both just said. And I think that's super powerful. And if you're listening, I'd be taking notes if you're not driving, or pause this and come back to it, because it's really, really good, important things to think about, taking that step back, looking at your priorities, and everything else kind of flows from there.
Yeah, and Jessica, you hinted at just another point too, which is that it's not just the number of choices that have increased exponentially, but it's also the social pressure of those choices, whether that be through social media or work, family, home. Students today feel like, boy, they've got to have great grades. They've got to be in 12 extracurricular activities in order to get into the top college, to get a great job. And It probably wasn't until I was into my 40s and 50s. Well, I guess I'm not 50 yet, but until I was in my 40s where I started to really feel satisfied with understanding this balance of choices that you make and being empowered by that you decide. And that then you can change your decision too. If it's not satisfying, you can try again every single day to focus on the things that have the most value for you. And that is hard to figure out too, right? What is the most important thing for you right now? What are the most important items that you want to spend your time on? And while it may sound kind of the opposite of what we're talking about in terms of this world of so many choices and so much work and so much to do, that one of the most important strategies that I think Carolina also applies is taking time to reflect, right? And looking at your lists, looking at all of the projects, looking at the commitments that you have on your calendar, looking at what's going on with your families, and reevaluating those priorities regularly is what helps me, at least, to know that I'm making choices. And that empowers me then to feel balanced in my life.
It's very good. One of the things, and I don't want to touch too much on the COVID topic just because it's exhausting. But, obviously that has shifted things for people, for all of us. It hasn't missed one of us, whether you're in the workforce or not, you're being affected, right? How have we as an organization, or how have you even just as a leader, with your direct reports, helped kind of support what you're talking about, like to prioritize, not just their, workload, but like mental health and family priorities and all of that, especially in times like this is unprecedented. We really don't have a template for, what do you have to say of that, or what has been an experience for you?
Well, and if I may, this last year is more than just COVID here in the United States, at least. Yeah, we have had the worst forest fires we've had in ages. We've had hurricanes. We've had political and social unrest, racial justice issues on top of COVID, right? And fear of others, fear of being seen with other people. And are they ill? Am I going to get sick? Many of us have had family members that have become seriously ill or passed away. And in my team, we've kind of seen it all. I was hit very hard by COVID personally. I was one of the early cases and kind of now what we know is a long haul COVID case. And so how did I help the team to address those things is I just was very open about what I was going through. And because we went from working in the office 100% to now working at home 100%, and we're fortunate to work for a company like Bosch that has the technological resources to make it possible for us to do our work remotely and in a safe way. But you had to have an outlet for that fear, for the anger, for the doubt. And so right away, I started a weekly session. I called it Spotlight on Change in HR Service, working in the age of coronavirus. And so we would come together every week and share stories. And what my team has told me is that the fact that I would be so open about how I was feeling, that I was having a good week, I was having a bad week, I was really worried about what was happening here, there, or elsewhere, it opened up all of my teams to have conversations about those topics, to say, you know what, work isn't just work, right? We're human beings first. And that made all the difference in the world for me and for many of the people, across my organization, just to make it okay and safe to talk about what they were experiencing and feeling. And to know that, particularly at the beginning, right, you had no childcare, you had, technology issues you're working out, and you're still trying to get as much work done as before, and you just can't. You can't do it all. And it had to be okay for people to not do it all. And I think that the best way for me to have led that was just by example and by opening up the floor to allow people to share.
Yeah, if I can build into that, I think vulnerability is a superpower. And for me, that was one of the biggest learnings through the pandemic, right? Like a lot of times, for me personally, lowering that barrier and being vulnerable is not always my comfort zone, right? Since I started my career, I was always a lot of times the youngest in my team, the only female in my team. That is no longer the case. But I always had this, or I felt the need to come across as strong and confident and professional and leaving my personal things outside, right? Like not showing any sign of vulnerability because I thought it was a sign of weakness. And I think that vulnerability in this case is a sign of strength. Right? The fact that you're able to be vulnerable, to share the things that you're going through, like Jason says, opens for other people to open themselves as well. When the pandemic started, I was very hesitant to turn my video on because I had my kids at home. They were not at school, and I was afraid of, they're going to see my kids running behind of me in a meeting, and what is other people going to think about me? They're going to think that I'm not working and I'm just taking care of my kids. And I had all these stories that I was telling myself that it was a lot of times is just in our heads, right? No one was thinking that. And there was a lot of people in my team that had the exact same situation. And there was this one time when we started to enable our cameras that one time my daughter popped in and, everyone started to pay more attention to my daughter than what I had to say. Like, and then that made me feel comfortable to say, this is our reality. This is what everyone else is going through. And if I let my daughter come in and interrupt me on a meeting or, share, as Jason say, the things that I'm struggling with and being open about those things, as a leader, I'm also giving permission to others to do the same and for that to be okay. A lot of times, again, we just need to lower our guards because we think that as a leader, we need to have it all put together and we need to come across a certain way. But as Jason said, we are humans first. We are parents first. There's a lot of things that come before the fact of us being the supervisor, the leader, and we need to acknowledge those things and embrace those things. We talk a lot about bring yourself to work. And to be honest, I was not bringing myself to work at the beginning of the pandemic because I was afraid of that. And until I realized that if I was afraid of it and I was not sharing it, I was not going to let the other people do the same. And then, no one was going to feel comfortable in an environment like that. Mm-hmm. I also learned a lot from the leaders in my team. I remember, Jason, you brought up the social unrest. And when that happened, I didn't know how to react. Like I didn't know, should I ask? Should I not ask? Should I bring it up? Should I not bring it up? And there was one of the directors in my team that she did a phenomenal job in opening the discussion. And I learned so much from that. So I think vulnerability also comes in that way of realizing that you can learn from anyone. Doesn't matter who it is or where it's coming from. And I think there's been a lot of learnings for all of us over the last few months. They say when you become a parent, you don't have like an instruction manual on how to. I think that same thing can be applied over the pandemic. Like we all went home thinking, we're going home for 2 weeks and we'll be back. And here we are. And there was no instruction manual on how to do it or what to do. It's been a constant experimenting and learning. And I think the culture that we have at Bosch, the environment that we have, the teams that we have, I feel really fortunate because it's made it so much easier with the technology, but also, as I said, just the support in general that we give to each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're all at a different place at a different point in time. And I think one of the keys that you're hinting at, or at least what I'm hearing and resonating in what you're saying, Carolina, is that you have to create the space. So as a leader, whether you formally hold the title or not, right, as a leader in your team, in your organization, in your family, you have to create the space for people to share what they're going through and to be that it's okay, right, that it impacts the workplace. Mm-hmm. When you're talking about the racial injustices in this country and the role that those in privilege play in maintaining those injustices was a really hard set of topics to wrestle with, and many were uncomfortable and didn't know how to address that in the workplace. But the reality is, your team is going through it. You're all going through it, and you're experiencing it in different ways, and it does impact your work life. And so just ignoring it does not solve the situation. Mm-hmm. And it can be hard to find the connection, as to what's the business value of spending time talking about, racial violence and inequity in the United States. But what I found was that it brought us all closer together. Again, it opened up the opportunity for members of the team to touch the topic of race in the workplace, to then discuss things like microaggressions that they had experienced. At Bosch, as you mentioned, we're a company that values diversity of opinion, of perspective, of background, of race, of ethnicity. All different types of diversity lead to better outcomes. But the reality is that we all experience it differently. And this gave us an opening to be honest with each other and to talk about what we should change, what we could do differently to be more inclusive mm-hmm. as a business and as a community.
That's really good. Speaking of being, vulnerable and open and transparent, as you said, Carolina, it's been almost 2 years now, and bringing up this topic of burnout again, just bringing that to the forefront, because I wonder if, everything that we've all just been talking about with, all the hard times we went through in the U.S. and across the world, that is heavy and it's constant, and there's no break from that really. First of all, has that opened the door to have those safe conversations for things like burnout? What is burnout? Does anyone have a definition of what they define burnout is? I can look up. I have a definition from how the WHO defines it, the World Health Organization. But I'd love to hear from you guys, what, and also if you're getting feedback internally, what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you bring up the WHO definition, Jessica. If my recollection, I haven't read it recently, but is that it deals specifically with the workplace. And I think that burnout applies to more than the workplace. And COVID and all of these other experiences that we've had, I think, have shown us that you can just get burnt out of dealing with life, right? Of coping with that stress. Yeah. It can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. It can manifest itself in aggression and anger. It can manifest itself in withdrawal and depression. And so one of the keys, I think, is one, being open about it, talking about it within your teams. Maybe you're not using the word burnt out, but just to say, I am exhausted this week. I can't get out of bed. I showered once this week, whatever the case may be. And sharing those things, again, lets people realize that it's okay to feel that way, one. And then you can share strategies and work together to get through it. I believe that, sometimes you need to pull away to get through your feelings of burnout, perhaps. But that more often it's through community, it's through loved ones, it's through colleagues that you can help to reinvigorate your purpose, help to see the value that you do provide in your personal life, in your professional life. And for me, that's how you get through it. I've had several times where I've just been totally burnt out. Mm-hmm. One of them was, most recently, as we went from this notion of, the pandemic and working from home, and boy, we're going to come back to the office in some way, shape, or form, in the notion of what we are calling smart work, right? So the ability to work from anywhere, at any time, as long and work on outcomes rather than FaceTime. But we, experienced a resurgence in cases of COVID, and as a result, that date got moved. Right? We were all hoping to come back in July, and then it got bumped to October. And I'll tell you, I was severely depressed for several weeks because of that, because I draw so much value out of the interactions with my team and my colleagues. I draw so much energy from interacting with others. This idea that I couldn't come back it just knocked me flat. And it knocked me flat too that 80% of my team wants to work from home 3 or more days a week, right? So they don't have the same need that I do to be together. And so then I really questioned, well, what's my value then as a leader, as a manager, in the organization, if, we are all going to be working remotely forevermore? And what does that look like? And it was really hard. And how did I get through it? I got through it by being open about it, right? I shared it with my team leads. I shared it then with the entire team, right? That this is what I'm feeling. And then through those discussions, able to find ways to connect and to kind of recreate value for yourself.
Yeah. I don't know that I can add much to what you said, Jason, but I think, I'm definitely not a professional in mental health or psychology or anything like that. So, but I think that burnout is something that grows progressively, right? You don't feel burnout from one day to the next. It's something that happens over time. And a lot of times it feels like it happens overnight because we haven't been paying attention to those early signs of burnout. For me, starts with stress. Are you feeling stressed more often? Are you feeling less energized? Are you feeling less driven or motivated? Like, if you're someone that a few months ago was looking forward to wake up in the morning and go to work and get excited about the projects that you were working in or seeing the people in your team, and all of a sudden, it takes you longer to wake up. You hit the snooze button several times. You feel that you don't have energy during the day, or for me, it was after lunch. Like I had this withdrawal of energy. I can't get a hold of myself and really be engaged in the discussions at work. Those were some of the early signs. And then it can go all the way to headaches or, being more cynical at work, not caring as much as you used to. So I think the first thing for me is just being self-aware. And we talked about reflection earlier, and it comes here back again. When you take the time to reflect on what's going on and think about what you're feeling, how you're feeling, and when you're feeling those things, can give you some hints that maybe you're heading towards burnout. And burnout is typically associated with work, but I think in this case, over the last 18 months or so, the pandemic has played a really key role in this. So, Jason, you were mentioning about, seeing people and being with people. I am an introvert by nature, and I thought, I'm going to be fine. I'm going to take a break from having to be social all the time, and it's going to be just fine. And there have been, I can't tell you how many times I have questioned whether I am an introvert or not, because we are social beings and we need to interact with others. And I think we made a really big mistake when we talk about social distancing, because we needed to physically distance, but didn't meant to really socially distance. And I think that the more you can create those social connections can also help prevent that burnout. For me, the way I see it is like a pyramid, right? If you have ever heard about the Maslow pyramid or needs. So I'll apply that to burnout. And for me, in the very basis of that pyramid is your health, like making sure that you're sleeping, looking at your nutrition. I mean, it's very easy when you're home and the kitchen is right there, right? To go and grab all the snacks during the day. Staying hydrated. You know, a lot of times you're working and you forget to drink your water. And then movement, like we're sitting down, we're in our house. At least when we were in the office, like we were walking from the parking lot to the office and within the building, and now we're home and we can be sitting down all day. So I think those are like at the basis, taking care of those things is the best way to prevent burnout. Mm-hmm. And then the next layer for me that has been really important has been one, setting boundaries with myself and with others. So I'll give you a quick example. When we were in the office, I had a really hard stop between 5 and 5:15. I had to leave the office to go pick up my kids. They were typically the last ones to get picked up at after school care, but that was my limit. And that was a boundary that was there all the time because I had that necessity to go pick up my kids. Being home when the pandemic started, personally, going back to this whole concept of vulnerability that we were talking before and being completely vulnerable right now, I thought I had to work more hours. I had to go the extra mile because I was afraid of what others might think, right, of me, because I had my kids at school and they were thinking I'm not working, I'm not providing results, I'm not visible. So I had to make myself visible through doing more, achieving more, and it's just my nature. And that translated into long days of working and losing that balance that we were talking at the beginning of our conversation that was leading to that burnout. So for me, was setting boundaries. And I have an alarm on my phone at 5:30 goes off, and it has a message that says, turn your computer off. And that's the time, unless there is an emergency or I'm in the middle of something, that I turn work off and I go and spend time with my kids the same way that I would if I was in the office. So setting boundaries and communicating those boundaries with others as well. A lot of times we think that because we're home, we are available 24/7, and that is not always true. And unless you set those boundaries, and you share those with others, everyone has different boundaries. So everyone acts based on their own boundary. So if my boundary is that at 5:30 I stop working, I'm not going to send emails after that time. But if Jason's boundary is like, no, on my boundaries, I send emails at whatever hour, and he expects others to respond to those emails, then you're trespassing other people's boundaries. So setting boundaries with yourself and with others, and routines. That has been so powerful. I have a morning routine. I have an evening routine with my kids as well. We kept sleep time. We kept all their same routines as when they were going to school. For myself is the same thing. And then Jason, you touch on something very important, which is the next layer for me is your support system. Is your family, is your friends, is your colleagues, like who are you surrounding yourself that are supporting you in any way? And support can look in so many different ways. But one thing that I've learned over the pandemic is asking for help. I'm the kind of person that, you know, I think that it is expected of me that I do it all. And it was hard. Like, I can't do it all, and recognizing that and seeking help, which can look in many different ways. And finally is seeking professional help. A lot of times we feel shame because we feel that if we seek professional help for burnout means that we have some kind of mental health issue, or
we failed.
It's really a stigma that we have, right? And I think we need to let that go. And if you really need help, seek for that professional help.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, I already mentioned for myself and in my team, I mean, many people reach that point, right, of really being so burnt out on the pandemic, on, political and social issues happening in the country, on the volume of work for our team, right? We're HR people, and we really care about the impact of all of these things on other associates. And the pandemic for our team brought about tremendous challenge to manage the payroll aspects and the benefit aspects of furlough time, of layoffs, right? Things that are impacting people. So not only was our volume up, but our complexity was up, our systems were up, and you're dealing with the fact that maybe there's some guilt, right? That you're getting to work while other people in the company are getting laid off. Our team, because we're a service, right? We were so critical to keeping the business going. We didn't reduce our hours, but I know that members of my team felt guilty that they got to work, and get their full salary while their colleagues did not. And all of those things, really build up over time. And while, there's research out there and we know many of the things to do, even the basics of getting up and walking around. When you're burnt out, you feel like you can't do those things. Mm-hmm. You feel like you're taking time away from the things that you should be doing. You're there to support others. You're there to get the work done. You're there to make things better for other people. And myself and many, they sacrifice their own health as a result. And so getting to that point where you realize that you do have to set boundaries, you have to be able to focus on particular priorities at particular points in the day and the week, ultimately, I think is the way through, right? Those are some of the strategies that you have to implement in order to come back from being burnt out. And you have to you have to create that value for yourself in what your work is, how it impacts others, how it impacts your family, and accept that you can't possibly do it all. And that you have to be open, with your team, with your colleagues about what's possible and what's not. So that way you can get through it together. And that's where I've seen much of the greatest success too, right? Is that our teams have come together. They help each other. They support each other. When you've got a child care issue or an elder care issue or your own care issue, whatever the case may be, people really step in to make it okay to take the time to focus on those other things that are also as important as just getting the job done.
Yeah, that's really good. I know myself, I've had days where I am just like, I have to move the rest of the meetings to another day. I'm sorry, everyone. Because it's just like, I cannot physically handle anymore, and I think that's what you're talking about is the transparency and not being afraid to be vulnerable and having, and I think even just us as an organization having this conversation on an externally facing podcast like we are right now is a huge deal. And I hope that those who are working at Bosch are listening and can hear that and feel empowered to be open with their management if they maybe haven't yet, because that's really hard. And I know for some people, especially like Carolina, to your point, if you're introvert to begin with, and if you feel all that pressure, you're the one person who does this job and no one else can do it, you're still important as a human first. And I think if anyone's getting anything from this podcast, I hope they hear that and that they do take the time to communicate and take time for themselves.
And the other thing as a leader too, is you can help people to make those choices, right? So as a small, for instance, we have a continuous improvement process, within our organization, and we work a lot on automation to reduce the manual effort of getting things done. And again, this notion of too many options, too many choices, too many projects that you could work on. I have told people multiple times in my group and my facilitator that facilitates these projects, I said, you know what? I don't care how many projects we start. Really, I don't. I care how many we finish, right? I would rather that you finish one than start 10. Over the year, I would rather that you finish 3 then started 50. Mm-hmm. And that granting of permission, right, to narrow the focus, to get rid of the clutter, to get rid of, those demands is something that we in leadership have to do. I believe that it's an important role that we play to help make those choices, right? Oftentimes we have the privilege of access to more information or different, associates across the organization, and can help to share then which of these priorities is actually the priority, right? Mm-hmm. And so that way then you can feel good about making that choice of what you're doing and what you're not doing.
Absolutely. With that, so I want to talk about this whole idea of smart work, and, to an external audience, I would call that maybe hybrid work. What would you refer that to? Because I know smart work is kind of our internal name.
Yeah, I think we started by calling it like work from anywhere.
Okay.
Kind of concepts, but it's not really work from anywhere, right? You can't just, drop everything and move to, Tahiti and work from an island, and still work in the United States because of tax and, immigration and, other laws, right?
Sure.
So there are limits to working from anywhere. But the notion that if your job can permit it, right? Because not every job allows you to have that flexibility to work from anywhere. But if your job permits it, to change our organizational culture to allow people to choose where to work. That if they would prefer to work in an office because their job requires innovation and collaboration, or they're like me and they just need that spontaneous interaction with others to give them energy, then great. If they would prefer to work from home, great. How do we enable that as a business so that way we focus less on presence culture, being in the office, face time equals productivity, and shifting to one that's based upon outcomes, based upon results, and giving people even more flexibility than perhaps they had before. Because I myself too, my team, we had some roles in our team that we were like, yep, they can be flexible, they can work from home 2 days a week. That's great. And other teams, no, there's no way. There's so much interaction that occurs between people that they've got to be in person to make that work. And the pandemic made us operate differently and proved that we could create connections that replicate much of the value of being in the office, while also eliminating many of the distractions of being in the office. So for some types of jobs, it's better. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely better. But then recognizing that for other types of work, critical problem solving, team building, innovation, strategy development, that the chance to come together in a space adds a lot of value. So smart work to us encompasses all of those things about where and how do you do work when you don't tie it to space any longer, to being together in an office.
And the other variable is when work gets done, right? Yep. So to your point, Jessica, before, if there's a day that you feel, okay, I can't handle any more meetings today, maybe, you work, after your kids go to bed, and then you start working again, because at that time you have calmed down and you're in a better space to focus on doing some concentrated work. So it's about working smarter, right? That's what we call it, smart work, and leveraging the tools that we have and leveraging flexibility and this culture of, not your productivity is based on how much hours you spend in the office, but really getting or achieving results that is driving smart works.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's really challenging, right? Because you don't have answers for all of these things. And the other thing that I think has been great about how we've approached this initiative that really we haven't implemented yet, right? We're still in pandemic lockdown stage, right? With very limited access to the office for those of us that have jobs that don't have to be in a manufacturing plant, right? That we're still working from home. We come to the office to get the mail and to do a couple of things, but other than that, you're working from home and you're separated. So we really haven't implemented this yet. But what I really appreciate has been shared from a top-down perspective is that this is an experiment, right? And we're going to learn along the way ourselves. We're going to learn from other companies and their experiences. And I think we're lucky that we have a culture and a value system that enables that, right? And allows us that space, and also has allowed people to have, I think, a lot of input into designing smart work for the future. My team has shared with me they have never felt more included, right, than in all of these discussions that we've had as a team about what do they want? What do they think the work requires? What do I think the work requires, as your supervisor, as your manager, and then coming together and then deciding that, ultimately, my team could be 100% remote. Right? We'll come together for social gatherings and team building and maybe trainings, but that otherwise it's completely up to you. You decide. If you would rather work from the office, great. We'll enable you to do that. If you would rather work from home, great. We'll enable you to do that. And I think how we are choosing to implement this in such an open way will really lead us to hopefully success over the long term. And we'll learn what balance of, how many Zoom calls, how many Teams calls can you handle in a day before you can't take them anymore. And you have to have, downtime from that. Or how much in-person interaction is really needed to help keep a culture alive and thriving or not. We don't have the answers to those things, but we're gonna try. And we're going to experiment with it. Now, Carolina, do you have a different perspective on it? Because, you see it even from a regional perspective.
No, I think you hit on all the points, Jason. I think that we've been talking about the future of work since now years, right? And this has been this vision that not only at Bosch, but in general has been out there, this concept. And I think, I always like to see the glass half full. And while the pandemic has represented a lot of challenges and has brought burnout and all these things that we're talking about today, I think it also has brought some positive things with it. And one of them is accelerating this change of moving in this direction of what Jason just described. Like, we were talking about this before the pandemic, but we were moving at a much slower pace that we are now, because when you're forced to work from home and your paradigms are challenged, then we have proven to ourselves that it's possible, and that has opened a range of possibilities that we didn't thought were possible. And I think, again, I always think, and this also in the context of work-life balance and burnout, I think has been key for me, is always trying to focus on seeing that glass half full. Every time you're in a situation, ask yourself, okay, when you're in the middle of it, you think it's challenging and you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but stepping back and asking yourself, okay, what positives can I learn from this situation? Can I find in this situation? How can you change the language from this is happening to me versus this is happening for me? And why is this happening? And I think this is a great example of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And how has the response been, at least within my team? I already mentioned, right? 80% of the team said, I want to work from home more than I want to be in the office.
Yeah.
And 40% of the team said, you know what? I don't care if I ever come back to the office on a regular basis at all, right? I would be happy to work from home 100% and come in just periodically as needed. And we have to, it's also really hard, right? Because we're still in the midst of dealing with the coronavirus and, the resurgence in cases that we're seeing across the country and the region right now. And so making this break from, okay, when are we out of the pandemic and now into smart work. Somehow there's going to have to be some marking and passing of time that we can ring the bell that says, okay, we're out of this time period where, yeah, we have to stay apart for our safety and our health, and now really think about how do we work most effectively, and how do we use space and time effectively to get the work of the company done and the work of the organization done. So while we're implementing many of the things, right, we're learning different strategies. How do we have a virtual global conference? How many hours per day can you really make that? Instead of 3 full days, okay, you go to 3 half days. And how do you make the sessions interactive and engaging? And right? All of those kinds of things that each team is trying to find their way in. And Bosch, I think, is doing a phenomenal job of providing resources to people in leadership, right, that are based in the best information and the best research that's available out there. I recently have just finished reading How to Thrive in the Virtual Workplace, right, a book by Robert Glazer. And he's somebody who has run, an entirely virtual business for the entire time, so is trying to share some of those lessons now with those of us that are making the shift from an in-person to a totally virtual culture. And we're doing everything that's in the book, right? We're working through those hard issues, and how to maintain people's, mental health, I think, is one of the primary things that we have to stay focused on. And how to provide meaningful connection in a virtual way is critical to our success as human beings, right? To our success as people. We have to have that connection, and it looks different for each individual. And so adapting that's going to be hard. I think it's going to be hard to establish those expectations and those new norms when we finally do, come out of the pandemic and move into this fully smart work enabled working situation.
Yeah, and it's exciting. And like you said, Carolina, the acceleration of this program, the fact that Bosch had it already in place, was talking about things, I think is so powerful, because we are able to learn during this time where, if you didn't have those things in place, you weren't already looking that far in the future, maybe we would miss some of these really important learnings. And to your point, Jason, I was interviewed for a Smart Work interview and got my, was able to share my open opinion. And I felt like so excited. I was like, wow, I've been actually a virtual worker, mostly virtual worker before the pandemic. So I felt like I was able to share from my perspective and what it used to be like versus now everyone doing it, and it was just like, they were so, the user experience team interviewed me, and they were so great about just like that. You could tell they really cared about what I was saying. You can tell when someone's genuinely surveying you or they're just checking boxes. And I just felt like, I thought that was really well done. And for someone, I've also been at Bosch for 15 years. So for someone who's been around a while, I was really impressed and pleased that we are taking the time during such a hard time. Everyone's got full plates, but we're taking the time to do this the right way and with the right intentions. And I think that we will see long-term success there no matter what. I think that's the answer, so I'm excited. I think this is really, as crazy as the times are, there's also, like you said, Carolina, positive things, really exciting things happening. We're able to do things quicker than we have before. It's an interesting time to be alive for sure. I wanted to ask, I love asking everybody who comes on the show what their best piece of advice is, either that you've received or that you continue to give out. It could be personal, professional. First thing that comes to mind for you, if you have one.
Know your strengths. So the old phrase, know thyself, right? That ultimately is, I think, at the core of figuring out what brings you satisfaction and what value you can best add to the people around you, at work, at home, etc. And so learning over time, where you are best where is your best self? And what does that look like? And how do you recreate that? Really leads to personal satisfaction and growth. And so if I were sharing one piece of advice, right, and this one piece of advice I share with many of my, up and coming team members as they're, gaining in their professional experience, is spend that time asking others, taking quizzes, figuring that out for yourself, reflecting and learning over time. Where do you generate the most value? Where are you at your strongest? What are your strengths? If you can figure that out, boy, I think you have, accomplished 80% of what it takes to become, a happy and successful individual in this world.
I love that. And I love the key point that you made a couple of times that I want to make sure people listening heard was over time, right? It's not
Yes.
a find your strength tonight, go stay up all night and pull an all-nighter. It takes time. And we're all on that journey, right? And I think that's such a good thing to focus on.
Absolutely. And getting others' perspectives is so helpful. Literally, there was this exercise that I took in my, graduate studies called, your best self. And you had to ask family and friends and colleagues, describe a time when you saw me at my best. What was that situation? And it was a really powerful experience. I thought, gosh, I'm an HR person. I've been doing this kind of thing. I take the quizzes. I know what my strengths are, etc. What value am I going to get out of this? But hearing it from others' perspectives, people that I cared about or people that I worked with closely, and the things that they chose to focus on was really enlightening and eye-opening and emotional for me.
Sure.
And if you have the chance to do an exercise like that, do it. There's no, what risk is there? Somebody says, no, I don't want to take the time, to do it. I can't take the time right now. But for those that, offer those kinds of perspectives and share that with you, I mean, it can really change your perception of yourself and influence your sense of where your strengths really are. So it's not just to reflect on your own, but to get those inputs from others.
Very good. Carolina, for you?
Listeners cannot see me nodding and smiling, but Jason, you bit me because I would have said the exact same thing. To complement that, I would say that the best investment that you can make is the one that you make on yourself. Today, we talked about work-life balance and burnout and smart work. And we talked about the fact that a lot of times we are so concerned about pleasing others, helping others, giving to others. And I think it's important that we make the time and the space to fill our cups on a regular basis. And that for me looks very different than it might look for others, right? We all have different ways of filling up our cup. So think about what are the things that energize you? What are the things that bring you joy? And do more of those things on a regular basis. We cover a few tips, but I would really recommend that you listen to our podcast about mental health that we recently did here in the Beyond Bosch podcast. That would be my advice, since Jason stole my biggest, best advice ever.
Oh, that's good. That's really good. They both complement each other really well. And I mean, you can tell both of you are in HR and have a heart for people, because at the heart of each of the things that every comment you've made, there is a genuine care and authenticity for the well-being of people. And I think that just really comes across. And I will say that is one of your strengths that I see as an observer. I know you didn't ask me to participate in a survey, but I will say that comes through very clearly. And I think it's so great. Thank you so much for sharing today and taking the time in such a crazy time to really empower people listening. I hope that those listening do feel just empowered to take the time for themselves, make the boundaries, set some time aside to really take that deep breath. And I hope this was super valuable. There's so many takeaways. And I think you guys just really brought a lot of really great things to the table. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Jessica. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. As with all episodes, this is not intended as medical advice. If you do have physical or mental challenges, please contact a healthcare professional. Thank you so much for tuning in to Beyond Bosch Podcast. Please go and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And consider leaving us a review with your thoughts about this episode. Thanks for listening.